The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Astoria ballroom dripped light like diamonds onto the city's elite. At the center of it all was Justin Vance, a man who moved as if he owned the very air everyone breathed. His arm was wrapped around the waist of Scarlett Dubois, a woman whose crimson dress was as bold as her ambition. They swayed to the music, a perfect portrait of power and passion. He was the king of his castle, a titan of industry, celebrating his latest triumph. But a king is only a king, so long as his castle is truly his. And tonight, the rightful owner had come to collect. The Starlight Charity Ball was the glittering apex of the New York social season, an event where fortunes were pledged on a whim and reputations were made or shattered between the soup and the salmon course. And tonight no star shone brighter than Justin Vance. At 42, he possessed a lethal combination of rugged good looks, honed by early mornings with a personal trainer, and the predatory grace of a man who had never been told no. His company, Vance Global Innovations, had appeared on the scene like a supernova disrupting tech markets with what financial journalists called unprecedented aggressive acquisitions. His face graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, his interviews filled with talk of vision disruption and legacy. Tonight, he was the event's guest of honor, having made a 7-figure donation to the Children's Hospital that sent a ripple of impressed murmurs through the ballroom. His tuxedo was a bespoke Tom Ford, the watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe that cost more than the average American home. Every detail of his existence was meticulously curated to scream success, and the most dazzling accessory on his arm was Scarlett Dubois. She was 26, a former art gallery assistant who now ran her own art consultancy, a venture funded entirely by Justin's generosity. With cascading auburn hair, eyes the color of emeralds, and a laugh that tinkled like ice in a crystal glass. She was the physical embodiment of his triumph over a world that had once looked down on him. She clung to him, her head resting on his shoulder as they danced, whispering in his ear. "They're all watching you, my love," she murmured, her voice a sultry purr. "Even the Pembertons look impressed. I saw Mrs. Pemberton staring at my necklace." Justin smiled, a confident, wolfish grin. "Let them stare. It's a bevulgare serpenti. A queen deserves to be adorned with jewels." He dipped her low, a theatrical move that drew a smattering of applause from nearby couples. For a moment, caught in the flash of a photographer's camera, they were the undisputed royalty of the evening. He felt invincible. Every handshake was firm, every backslap a confirmation of his status. He moved through the crowd like a shark trailed by fawning investors and ambitious young entrepreneurs hoping for a moment of his time. He spoke of market caps, quarterly earnings, and his new venture into sustainable energy with an authority that left no room for doubt. But beneath the polished veneer, a tiny cold serpent of anxiety was coiled in his gut. It was a familiar feeling, one he'd lived with for years, but tonight it was more active, its hissing almost audible over the string quartet. He pushed it down with another flute of Dom Perignon, the bubbles a temporary balm on his frayed nerves. His life was a masterpiece of illusion. Vance Global Innovations existed, yes, but it was not the empire he portrayed. It was a house of cards built on leveraged debt, wildly optimistic projections, and a single monumental lie that formed its foundation. The lie was so audacious, so complete, that no one had ever thought to question it. His wife Amelia was not here tonight. When he'd left their cavernous Fifth Avenue apartment, she had been sitting in the library, a book open in her lap, her face pale and still. Another late night, Justin. She had asked, her voice quiet, devoid of its usual warmth. It's the Starlight Ball, Ellie. I'm the guest of honor. We discussed this. You're the guest of honor, she corrected softly. I have a headache. You and Scarlett can represent the Vance name just fine. The casual, almost dismissive way she mentioned Scarlett's name sent a chill down his spine. For months, Amelia had been distant, retreating into a shell of polite indifference. The fiery, brilliant woman he had married, the one who had challenged him and sharpened his ambition, had been replaced by this placid, observant ghost. He told himself it was ennui, the boredom of a life with too much comfort. He preferred that explanation to the alternative that she knew, that she was watching him waiting. He pushed the thought away. Here in the glittering ballroom with Scarlett's warm body pressed against his and the scent of her expensive perfume filling his senses, his wife felt like a relic from another life. Amelia was stability history, the bedrock. Scarlett was the future, the prize, the proof that he had truly arrived. You seem distracted, Scarlett whispered, her fingers tracing the lapel of his jacket. Is everything all right? Perfectly, he lied smoothly, his smile returning. I was just thinking about our trip to St. Bart's next week. The yacht is confirmed. Her eyes lit up, the momentary concern vanishing. This was the world she wanted, the one he had promised her. It was the world he had promised himself. And he would do anything, burn anyone, to keep it from turning to ash. He spun her around, laughing as the music swelled, pulling her closer. He was Justin Vance, the master of the universe. Nothing could touch him. From across the room, near the grand arching entrance, a journalist from the Wall Street Journal, a man known for his incisive, unforgiving investigations, watched him. The journalist Marcus Thorne didn't look impressed. He looked hungry. And Justin, for the first time that night, felt a genuine, terrifying pang of fear. The serpent in his gut had finally uncoiled. Amelia Vance was not at home with a headache. She was sitting in the back of a black Mercedes Maybach, its silent engine gliding through the glistening streets of Manhattan, the city lights painting fleeting strokes across her stoic face. The book she had been holding an hour ago, a first edition of Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, now lay on the seat beside her. Its theme of female independence had never felt more resonant. Her transformation had been a quiet one, an awakening that happened not in a thunderclap, but in a series of small, unsettling discoveries. It began 6 months ago, with a letter. A collections notice from a creditor she'd never heard of for a loan of $2 million she knew nothing about. It had been mistakenly delivered to their old Hamptons address and forwarded on slipping through the net of Justin's carefully controlled mail. When she'd confronted him, he had laughed it off. An aggressive clerical error, darling. I'll have my legal team crush them. He was so charming, so dismissive, that she almost believed him. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Amelia was the daughter of a university history professor and an accountant. She grew up in a world of books, budgets, and verifiable facts. She was intelligent, methodical, and had a mind for numbers that Justin, in his sweeping grandeur, often underestimated. While he was out chasing a legacy, she had quietly managed their personal finances, the household accounts, and the family trust for their 2 children away at boarding school. She was the one who balanced the books. So she started digging. Not with malice, but with a growing sense of dread. She began with the small things. The credit card statements he kept locked in his office desk. She picked the lock, a skill learned during a rebellious teenage phase, and found charges that didn't align with his business trips. Suites at the George V in Paris when he was supposed to be in Frankfurt. Jewelry from Graff and Cartier that she had never received. extravagant dinners at restaurants she'd never heard of. The name Scarlett Dubois appeared again and again. A quick, discreet search revealed the art consultant's social media, a gaudy digital scrapbook of a life funded by her husband. There she was wearing the Cartier bracelet, dining at the Parisian restaurant, her arm linked with a man who was always just out of frame. The betrayal was a physical blow, a cold fist clenching in her chest. But it was the financial discoveries that truly terrified her. Using her knowledge of their accounts, she delved deeper. She saw massive unexplained cash withdrawals, loans taken against assets she thought were secure, a complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts that seemed designed not to grow wealth, but to hide it, or perhaps to hide a lack of it. Vance Global Innovations. The company he paraded as his own creation seemed less like a solid institution and more like a shimmering mirage. Her first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to shatter the illusion with the force of her pain. But she knew Justin. He would lie. He would gaslight her, call her hysterical, and then lock down his finances so tightly she would never find the truth. She needed more than suspicion. She needed proof. She needed power. Her father had once introduced her to a man at a university, Benefit, a reclusive philanthropist who had been a quiet legend in the financial world for half a century. A man whose name was synonymous with old money integrity and immense understated power. Mr. Alistair Finch. She found his private office number through a family connection and made the call. Her voice trembling but determined. She expected to be rebuffed by a secretary, but the man himself answered on the second ring. His voice a calm, deep baritone. She explained who she was and that she needed to discuss a matter of utmost urgency and discretion regarding Justin Vance. To her astonishment, he agreed to a meeting. The next day, she sat in his office, a quiet, wood-paneled sanctuary, high above Central Park, that smelled of old leather and tea. Alistair Finch was in his late 70s, with piercing blue eyes and an air of absolute stillness. He listened without interruption as she laid out her findings. The debt, the lies, Scarlett, the precarious nature of Justin's company. She expected shock, perhaps pity. She received something else entirely. When she was finished, he looked at her, his expression not of surprise, but of profound disappointment. "Amelia," he said, his voice gentle, "I am so very sorry you have had to discover this on your own. I had hoped the situation would resolve itself before it came to this." Amelia stared at him, confused. "You know," Alistair sighed, rising from his desk to look out the window at the park below. "I know Justin Vance better than he imagines. Vance Global Innovations is not his company. It is a subsidiary of Finch Holdings." The room seemed to tilt. Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. "What years ago?" Alistair explained, turning back to her. "I acquired a portfolio of promising but mismanaged tech startups. I needed a dynamic, aggressive CEO to package and run them, someone with a great talent for sales and public relations. Justin Vance, who was then a junior executive at one of the firms, was recommended. He was brilliant, charismatic, and monumentally ambitious." He paused, his gaze meeting hers. "I gave him a title, a generous salary, and a very small, conditional equity stake. I made him the public face of the company. The name Vance Global Innovations was his idea. It fed his ego. I allowed it because a confident front man is good for business. I remained a silent majority partner, the true owner. The capital, the assets, the patents, they are all mine." Amelia felt a wave of nausea. Justin wasn't just a cheat and a liar. He was a fraud on a scale she could never have imagined. He wasn't a king. He was a court jester who had stolen the king's crown and was pretending it fit. For a while he performed well. Alistair continued, but in the last 2 years, his narcissism has spiraled out of control. He began to believe his own press. He started leveraging the company's assets for personal gain, for this lifestyle. He has been cooking the books to hide his profligacy from my auditors. I have been building a case against him for months. I was going to remove him at the end of the fiscal quarter. Amelia's mind raced, piecing it all together. The lies, the debt, it was all a desperate attempt to maintain an image built on someone else's foundation. Tonight, she said, her voice now steady. The trembling gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He is at the Starlight Ball. He's the guest of honor. He made a $1 million donation. Alistair's eyebrows rose. Did he now with whose money, I wonder? A plan began to form in Amelia's mind. A plan born of heartache and fury. This couldn't end in a quiet dismissal and a discreet divorce. Justin's humiliation needed to be as public as his arrogance. He had built his world on a stage, and she was going to bring the curtain down in the middle of his grand performance. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice ringing with newfound strength, "you were going to fire him at the end of the quarter. I would like to ask you to move up the timeline to tonight." Alistair Finch studied her for a long moment. He saw not a wronged wife seeking petty revenge, but a woman of substance reclaiming her life. He saw the fire that Justin had tried to extinguish. He saw an ally. A slow smile spread across his lips. "An excellent idea, Mrs. Vance. I believe a public statement is in order. Shall we go?" As the Maybach pulled to a stop a block from the Astoria, Amelia looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The pale, uncertain woman from the library was gone. In her place was a woman who knew the truth. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored navy blue gown. Her only jewelry, the sapphire engagement ring Justin had given her years ago, a ring she now realized was likely paid for with borrowed money. It felt heavy on her finger, a final link to the lie. She slipped it off and placed it in her clutch. Her escort, a man of true power and substance, opened the car door for her. Together they walked towards the bright lights of the hotel, two silent architects of a spectacular demolition. Inside the Grand Astoria ballroom, the atmosphere was effervescent. Champagne flowed from gravity-defying towers, and the air hummed with the potent cocktail of power, wealth, and ambition. Justin Vance was holding court near the stage, a circle of admirers hanging on his every word. He was retelling the story of a recent hostile takeover, embellishing details to cast himself as a ruthless corporate warrior. "The board was sentimental," he said, with a condescending chuckle, adjusting the lapels of his jacket. "They wanted to protect the company's founding legacy. I told them legacy doesn't pay the shareholders. We closed the deal by dawn. Sometimes you have to be the wolf." The group laughed appreciatively. Scarlett gazed at him with undisguised adoration, her hand resting proprietarily on his arm. She felt the intoxicating pull of his power, a force that she believed would soon be hers to wield as well. She was no longer Scarlett Dubois, the girl from Queens. She was on the verge of becoming Mrs. Justin Vance, a name that would open every door. It was then that the grand oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The entrance of a new guest at a gala is rarely a momentous occasion, but this was different. The change in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and profound. It was not a sound, but a sudden absence of it. The low thrum of 100 conversations seemed to dip as if a conductor had abruptly lowered his baton. Heads turned first out of idle curiosity, then with widening eyes of disbelief. Amelia Vance stood in the doorway. But it was not the Amelia they knew. The society wives who exchanged polite air kisses with her at luncheons were used to a woman of quiet elegance and reserved grace. The woman standing before them now was transformed. Her navy gown was understated, yet commanded attention, its clean lines a stark contrast to the frothy, jeweled creation surrounding her. Her hair was swept back, revealing a face that was not smiling, but was instead set with a look of serene, unshakable resolve. She radiated an aura of power that was entirely new, an energy that made the glittering diamonds and forced smiles in the room seem cheap and flimsy. But it wasn't just her transformation that caused the collective intake of breath. It was the man standing beside her. Alistair Finch was a ghost of the financial world, a legend whispered about in boardrooms, but almost never seen. His photograph hadn't appeared in a newspaper in 20 years. He moved in circles, so rarefied they were practically mythical. To see him here at a public event was like spotting a snow leopard on Park Avenue. His presence alone was a seismic event. And he was standing next to Amelia Vance, his hand resting lightly and protectively on the small of her back. The gossip began instantly, a ripple of whispers that spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Is that Alistair Finch? What is he doing with Amelia Vance? I thought she was ill tonight. Look at her. She doesn't look ill. She looks dangerous. Justin's story faltered mid-sentence. He had his back to the entrance, but he felt the shift in the room's energy, the sudden diversion of his audience's attention. He turned a flicker of annoyance on his face, ready to reclaim the spotlight. His eyes met Amelia's across the vast, suddenly silent expanse of the ballroom. The blood drained from his face. The confident smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a mask of stunned confusion. Why was she here, and why in God's name was she with Alistair? Finch. Finch was a recluse, a silent partner he hadn't spoken to directly in over a year, communicating only through layers of lawyers and accountants. Their relationship was one of professional distance, just as Justin preferred it. Seeing him here with his wife felt like a violation of the natural order, a nightmare made real. Scarlett felt the change in him immediately. His arm tensed under her hand. Justin. What is it? She asked, following his gaze. She saw a handsome, well-dressed woman and an old man. She felt a prickle of jealousy at the woman's poise, but didn't understand the significance. Who are they? Justin didn't answer. His mind was racing, trying to compute the impossible equation before him. Amelia, Finch, together, here. It didn't make sense. A dozen frantic scenarios played out in his head, each more terrifying than the last. Was this about their marriage? Was she publicly leaving him for an older, richer man? The absurdity of the thought was almost comical, but the ice-cold dread gripping his heart was anything but. Amelia and Alistair began to walk. They didn't hurry. Their pace was slow, deliberate, regal. With every step they took, the path before them cleared as if they were parting the Red Sea. People backed away, their whispers dying on their lips, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. The string quartet, sensing the dramatic shift, faltered and then stopped playing altogether. The only sound was the soft click of Amelia's heels on the marble floor, a sound that echoed in the cavernous room like a ticking clock counting down to doomsday. Marcus Thorne, the journalist, watched with rapt attention, his professional instincts screaming. This was it. This was the story. He subtly angled his body, ensuring his phone's camera had a clear, unobstructed view. The walk across the ballroom floor felt like an eternity. To Justin, it was a death march. He watched his wife approach a woman he had systematically underestimated, ignored, and betrayed. He saw now with horrifying clarity the intelligence in her eyes, the steel in her spine. This was not the quiet, compliant wife he had left at home. This was a stranger, a beautiful, avenging angel. And beside her, the old man whose quiet demeanor belied a power so vast it could erase Justin from existence with a single phone call, walked with the calm certainty of a man who owned the very ground on which they all stood. By the time they reached Justin's circle, the entire gala had come to a standstill. Every eye in the room was fixed on the four people at its center: the fraud, the mistress, the wife, and the king. The air was thick with unspoken tension, charged and volatile, ready to ignite. Amelia and Alistair stopped a few feet from Justin and Scarlett. The silence in the ballroom was now absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all other senses. It was as if the hundreds of guests had ceased to breathe, becoming a silent chorus for the drama unfolding before them. For a long moment, no one spoke. The four of them stood in a tableau of impending disaster. Justin, his face a ghastly shade of pale, finally found his voice. It came out as a strained, unnatural croak, a desperate attempt to regain control of a situation that was spiraling into a black hole. "Amelia," he said, forcing a brittle smile. "What a surprise. I thought you were feeling unwell. And Mr. Finch? An honor to see you out and about. To what do we owe the pleasure?" He tried to project his usual charismatic confidence, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He was a bad actor in the final scene of a play he no longer understood. Amelia's expression didn't change. Her gaze was level, her eyes holding his with an intensity that made him want to look away. She didn't acknowledge his question. Instead, she looked past him, her eyes landing on Scarlett for the first time. She looked at the younger woman, not with the fury of a spurned wife, but with something far more devastating, a cool, clinical pity. Her eyes scanned the Bivulgari necklace, a piece she recognized from a receipt she had found before meeting Scarlett's gaze. "That's a beautiful piece," Amelia said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the silent room. "He has expensive taste. You should know, however, that it was purchased with a line of credit secured against a home that is solely in my name. I suppose in a way that makes it a gift from me." Scarlett's face flushed a deep crimson. The insult was so precise, so elegantly delivered, it was like being struck by a poisoned dart. She opened her mouth to retort, to say something cutting, but no words came. She looked to Justin for defense, but he was staring at Amelia, his face a mask of horror. He knew in that instant that this was not about jealousy. This was an execution. "Amelia, this is hardly the time or the place," Justin stammered, taking a half-step forward as if to shield Scarlett, a pathetic, reflexive gesture of a man protecting one asset from another. On the contrary, Justin Alistair Finch spoke for the first time. His voice was not loud, but it had a gravelly resonance of pure authority that commanded total attention. Every guest in the room leaned in, straining to hear. "I think this is the perfect time and place. A man's character is best judged in public." Alistair's eyes, cold and blue, as a winter sky settled on Justin. "I was just telling Amelia about the nature of our business relationship. I find that transparency is always best. Don't you?" Justin felt a wave of dizziness. He felt trapped, cornered, the brilliant lights of the chandeliers suddenly feeling like harsh, interrogating lamps. I don't know what you mean," he managed to say the lie, sounding feeble even to his own ears. "Let me clarify." Alistair said, his tone patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "For 10 years you have been the face of a company. You have taken the credit, you have graced the magazine covers, and you have enjoyed the considerable perks of the position I gave you. But you seem to have forgotten a fundamental truth, Justin. A frontman is not the main event. He is merely an employee." Scarlett's head whipped around to look at Justin, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror. Employee. The word hung in the air, ugly and incongruous with the man who had promised her the world. The man she believed was a self-made titan. "What is he talking about, Justin?" she whispered, her voice sharp with panic. Justin ignored her. His entire focus was on Alistair and Amelia, the two architects of his ruin. He saw the cold, righteous fury in his wife's eyes and the final dispassionate judgment in Alistair's. "This is a private matter," Justin hissed, his voice low and desperate. "We can discuss this in an office like civilized people." "We are well past that point," Amelia said, her voice cutting through his plea. "You built this life, this grand illusion on a stage for everyone to see. It's only fitting that they see it for what it really is." She took a step closer, her voice dropping but losing none of its steely edge. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? The debt, the lies, the women. Did you think I was just another one of your decorative assets? Something to be stored in your Fifth Avenue apartment until needed." Every word was a perfectly aimed blow. Justin flinched. He had no defense. The lies he had lived by for so long were useless against the cold, hard weight of the truth. He looked around the room at the sea of faces watching him. These were the people whose approval he had craved, whose envy he had cultivated. Now their expressions were a mixture of shock, fascination, and undisguised schadenfreude. He was no longer their peer. He was their evening's entertainment. The public spectacle he had so desperately wanted was his, just not in the way he had ever imagined. The confrontation was not a screaming match, not a messy, emotional scene. It was something far worse. It was a quiet, methodical public dissection, and the surgeons were holding their scalpels ready to make the final fatal incision. The tension in the ballroom had reached its zenith. Justin Vance stood exposed, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him in slow motion. He looked from his wife's resolute face to Alistair Finch's impassive one, searching for an exit, a way to spin this, to lie his way out one last time. But there was no escape. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Justin blurted out, a last desperate act of defiance. He turned his attention to the crowd, his voice rising in a theatrical appeal. "This is a private marital dispute, complicated by a bitter business disagreement. My wife is overwrought, and Mr. Finch is attempting a hostile takeover, using my family to do it." A few people in the crowd murmured the accusation of corporate raiding a familiar narrative. For a fleeting second, a sliver of hope ignited in Justin. Perhaps he could paint himself as the victim. Alistair Finch shattered that hope with a single quiet laugh. It wasn't a sound of mirth, but of pure, incredulous irony. "A hostile takeover," Alistair repeated, shaking his head slowly. "My dear boy, you cannot take over something you already own. Every share, every patent, every brick and server of Vance Global Innovations is and always has been the property of Finch Holdings." He gestured vaguely around the opulent ballroom. "This entire evening. Your generous $1 million donation to the hospital. A noble gesture. It will, of course, be honored, but it will be noted in the records as a donation from Finch Holdings, as it was our money you were pledging." The collective gasp from the audience was audible. This was no longer a domestic squabble. This was the public detonation of a man's entire identity. Alistair turned his gaze to Marcus Thorne, the journalist, who was now openly recording the scene with his phone. "Mr. Thorne," Alistair said, his voice projecting clearly, "let me give you a headline. As of 9:30 p.m. this evening, Justin Vance has been summarily dismissed from his position as CEO of my subsidiary company for gross financial misconduct and embezzlement. A full forensic audit is underway, and we will be cooperating with the District Attorney's office." Embezzlement. District Attorney. The words struck the room like hammer blows. The veneer of a high society drama cracked, revealing the ugly reality of white-collar crime beneath. Justin staggered back a step, as if he had been physically struck. "You can't do this," he whispered, his bravado utterly gone, replaced by the raw panic of a cornered animal. "It's already done," Alistair said calmly. All eyes now turned to Scarlett. Her face was a mask of disbelief and fury. The future she had so carefully curated, the St. Bart's yacht trips, the life as a society queen, the endless supply of vulgari, had just evaporated before her eyes. The man she had hitched her star to was not a titan, but a glorified manager, a thief who had been caught with his hand in the till. She let go of Justin's arm, as if it were red hot. "You lied to me," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You told me you built it from nothing. You let me believe. You let me give up everything for you." Justin turned to her, his eyes pleading. "Scarlett, baby, I can fix this. It's a misunderstanding. We are nothing." She spat, her voice rising to a shrill cry. She took a step back, creating a physical and symbolic distance between them. Her dream had become a nightmare, and she had no intention of being dragged down with him. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, she turned to the crowd, her face streaked with tears. "I knew nothing about this. He deceived me just as he deceived everyone." With that, she turned and fled. Pushing her way through the stunned guests, her crimson dress a slash of color as she disappeared from the ballroom and from Justin's life. Her exit was the final humiliating punctuation mark on his downfall. Now truly alone, Justin stood in the center of the room, the focus of hundreds of pairs of eyes. His face, once so animated with confidence, was slack with shock. The king had been dethroned, his castle revealed to be a painted backdrop, and his queen had abandoned him. Two uniformed security guards, who had been discreetly summoned by the hotel manager at Alistair's signal, moved purposefully through the crowd. They flanked Justin, their presence large and imposing. "Mr. Vance," one of them said, his voice polite but firm, "we're going to have to ask you to come with us." Justin looked at them, then at Amelia one last time. In her eyes he saw no triumph, no gloating, only a profound and weary sadness. The sadness of a future that had been stolen by his lies. He had not only lost his fortune and his freedom. He had lost the one person who had ever truly believed in him, long before the illusion was even built. As the guards, gently but inexorably, guided him towards a side exit, away from the prying eyes and the now buzzing cameras, the silence in the room finally broke. The whispers erupted into a roar of conversation. Photographers rushed forward, their flashes popping, capturing the ignominious retreat of the fallen mogul. Amelia Vance stood perfectly still amidst the chaos, a pillar of calm in the storm of her own making. She watched him go, not with hatred, but with the quiet, devastating finality of closure. The house of cards had fallen, and she was the one who had pulled out the first card. As Justin was escorted out, a service exit plunged from the pinnacle of society into the harsh, fluorescent-lit reality of a hotel corridor. The grand ballroom buzzed with the frenetic energy of a scandal in full bloom. The story of Justin Vance's spectacular implosion was already spreading beyond the Astoria's walls, zipping across the city via text messages, tweets, and frantic phone calls to gossip columnists. The Starlight Ball would be remembered not for its philanthropy, but for the public execution of a man's reputation. In the eye of this hurricane stood Amelia. The guests who moments before had been staring at her with rapt attention now seemed unsure how to approach her. She was no longer just Amelia Vance, the quiet, respectable wife. She was the architect of this demolition, a woman who had revealed a strength and ruthlessness no one had suspected. Alistair Finch gently touched her elbow. "Let's get some air," he said, his voice a low anchor in the swirling sea of noise. He guided her away from the ballroom through a private doorway and onto a secluded terrace overlooking the twinkling expanse of Central Park. The cool night air was a welcome relief. For the first time since she had walked through the ballroom doors, Amelia allowed her composure to crack. A long, shuddering breath escaped her lips, and she gripped the cold stone balustrade for support. "It's done," she whispered more to herself than to Alistair. "Yes, it is," he confirmed, standing beside her. He didn't offer empty platitudes or congratulations. He simply stood with her, a silent witness to the immense emotional toll of the evening. "Did you see his face, Alistair?" she asked, her voice thick with a sorrow that surprised her. "At the very end, he looked like a lost little boy." "Many con men do when the con is finally over," Alistair replied gently. "They build their identities on the adoration and envy of others. When that is stripped away, there is often very little left underneath. Do not mistake your pity for his innocence, Amelia. The man was a predator. He preyed on your trust, on my investment, and on that young woman's ambition. Tonight was not an act of revenge. It was an act of justice." She knew he was right. The pity she felt was a phantom limb, an echo of the love she once had for the man she thought Justin was. That man had never really existed. He was a character Justin had invented, and she had been his most loyal audience. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. It was a text from her eldest daughter away at school in Switzerland. "Mum, is everything okay? People are saying crazy things online about Dad." The real fallout was just beginning. Protecting her children from the shrapnel of their father's explosion would be her next and most important battle. "What happens now?" she asked Alistair. "To him, the authorities will take over. He has committed serious financial crimes. There will be trials, legal battles. It will be messy. But my legal team will handle everything related to the company. They will also represent your interests in the divorce, if you'll have them. We will ensure that you and your children are protected and receive what you are rightfully owed." "Thank you," she said the words, feeling inadequate. They stood in silence for a few more minutes, watching the distant river of headlights flowing through the park. Inside, the party was breaking up the guests, leaving with the night's juicy scandal to dissect over brunch the next day. The story of the Vances was now public property. Somewhere in the city, Scarlett Dubois was likely making a frantic call to her lawyer or perhaps another wealthy suitor, attempting to spin her story, to cast herself as the ultimate victim and salvage what was left of her reputation. Her flight from the ballroom was an act of survival, and Amelia couldn't bring herself to feel anything but a distant, weary disdain for the girl. She was a symptom of Justin's disease, not the cause. Finally, Amelia straightened up, pulling her wrap around her shoulders. The sadness was still there, a dull ache in her chest, but it was now overlaid with a profound sense of release. She was free. The weight of Justin's lies, a burden she had carried unknowingly for years, was finally lifted. "I think I'm ready to go home," she said. Not to the opulent Fifth Avenue apartment that now felt like a gilded crime scene, but to the idea of a home she could now build for herself, one founded on truth and her own strength. Alistair nodded, a look of deep respect in his eyes. "Of course. My car is waiting." As they walked away from the terrace, leaving the noise and the wreckage of her old life behind, Amelia felt the first tentative stirrings of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. It was a future where her name was not just an attachment to a man's, but was entirely her own. The night had been an ending, but it was also, she realized, a beginning. 3 months later, the name Justin Vance was no longer on the lips of New York's elite, but in the dry, factual columns of the financial crime blotter. The Wall Street Journal had run a devastating expose, with Marcus Thorne's byline detailing the intricate web of fraud Justin had spun. Tabloid headlines screamed about his indictment on multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. His assets were frozen, his reputation so toxic that former friends and colleagues crossed the street to avoid making eye contact with his lawyers. The Wolf of Wall Street had been declawed, defanged, and caged, awaiting a trial whose outcome was a foregone conclusion. Amelia sat in a bright, airy office in Soho, a space that smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Sunlight streamed through the large industrial windows, illuminating blueprints and fabric swatches spread across a large oak table. The grand, suffocating apartment on Fifth Avenue had been sold as part of the legal proceedings. With the considerable assets Alistair's lawyers had secured for her funds, that were legally hers and untainted by Justin's fraud, she had bought a smaller, elegant brownstone downtown and invested the rest in her own venture. She had started an interior design firm, Vance & Co. A deliberate act of reclaiming her own name. It had been a passion she had suppressed during her marriage, relegated to a hobby. Now it was her profession. Her first major client was fittingly Alistair Finch, who had tasked her with redesigning the corporate lobby of Finch Holdings. It was a public vote of confidence that had instantly put her on the map. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her daughter, a picture of her son home from school for the weekend, laughing as they baked a cake in the new kitchen. The caption read, "He's trying to eat all the frosting. It's good to be home, Mum." Amelia smiled a genuine, unburdened smile. The divorce had been finalized last week. The proceedings were swift and brutal for Justin's side. He had nothing left to bargain with. She had been granted full custody, and a settlement that ensured her and the children's futures were secure. She had not seen him since that night at the Gala, and she had no desire to. Alistair Finch had become a surprising and cherished friend. He was a mentor offering shrewd business advice and quiet encouragement. There was no romance between them, only a deep mutual respect. He had seen the strength in her when she couldn't see it in herself, and for that she would always be grateful. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about the wreckage. She thought of Scarlett, who had reportedly moved to London, seeking to reinvent herself far from the fallout. She thought of Justin, sitting in a cell. The tailored suits and Patek Philippe watches replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit. She didn't rejoice in his downfall. It was a tragedy, a life wasted in the pursuit of a hollow image. His greatest crime, she realized, was not the money he stole, but the trust he betrayed and the potential he squandered. He had been so busy playing the part of a great man that he had never bothered to simply be a good one. Her new assistant knocked on the doorframe. "Mrs. Vance, the clients from the Mercer project are here." Amelia stood up, smoothing the front of her blazer. She was no longer just Mrs. Justin Vance, the appendage to a powerful man. She was Amelia Vance, founder, CEO, mother survivor. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged. Looking out the window at the bustling New York street below, she felt a sense of peace. The past was a closed chapter. Before her was a blank page, and for the first time in a very long time, she was the one holding the pen. The world Justin Vance now inhabited was a universe away from the Grand Astoria ballroom. It was a place of muted greys and washed-out greens, of echoing footsteps on linoleum floors, and the pervasive antiseptic smell of industrial cleaner, failing to mask the underlying scent of despair. The pre-trial detention center on Rikers Island did not have chandeliers. It had fluorescent tube lights that hummed incessantly, casting a pallid, unflattering glow on everyone and everything. Stripped of his bespoke suits, his Swiss watches, and the charismatic aura they helped project, Justin was diminished. In the standard-issue orange jumpsuit, he looked smaller, his confident posture replaced by a bitter, resentful slump. He had spent the last 3 months in a state of suspended disbelief, cycling through rage, self-pity, and a burning, venomous hatred for the two people he held responsible for his predicament: Alistair Finch, and most of all, Amelia. In his mind, he was a victim of a colossal betrayal. He wasn't a criminal. He was a visionary who had been stabbed in the back. He had flown too close to the sun. Yes, but it was Amelia who had personally ripped the feathers from his wings and watched him plummet to the earth. The long, silent hours in his cell were not spent in remorseful contemplation, but in replaying that night at the Gala, dissecting every word, every look, his fury growing with each imagined slight. His high-priced lawyer, a man paid for by the last dregs of a legal defense fund Alistair had surprisingly permitted, had been blunt. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The forensic audit had unearthed a mountain of deceit. His only hope was a plea bargain that might shave a decade or two off a lengthy prison sentence. For that, the lawyer had explained a show of remorse would be invaluable. Character witnesses a statement from his ex-wife about his role as a father. These things could influence a judge. And so Justin had made the call. He had requested a meeting with Amelia. It was a calculated gamble, his final move on a chessboard where he had already lost his king. He would swallow his pride, feign contrition, and play the only card he had left, their shared history and their children. Amelia agreed to the visit against the strenuous advice of Alistair and her own lawyers. "There is nothing to be gained," Amelia Alistair had told her over the phone, his voice laced with concern. "He is a master manipulator. Do not give him an arena to perform in." But Amelia knew it was something she had to do. Not for him, but for herself. It was the final chapter of a book she needed to close with her own hands. She needed to face the man stripped of all his power and pretense, and confirm that the hold he once had on her was well and truly broken. She walked into the visitation room, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. She wore a simple cream-colored blouse and grey trousers, an outfit that was professional, understated, and utterly devoid of vulnerability. The Amelia who had once cried over his casual cruelties was gone forever. They sat opposite each other, separated by a thick pane of smudged plexiglass, and spoke through crackling receivers. Justin picked his up first. He had rehearsed his opening, aiming for a tone of broken humility. "Ellie," he began, his voice a low rasp. "Thank you for coming. You look... well." "I am Justin," she replied, her voice steady and clear through the receiver, without a hint of the emotion he had hoped to hear. He forged on with his script. "I've had a lot of time to think in here. About everything. About us. I remember when we first met at that fundraiser. I was so nervous. You were the most brilliant, beautiful woman I had ever seen. Everything I did, everything I built, it was all for you, you know, to give you the world. It was a classic Justin maneuver, a romantic lie wrapped around a kernel of truth." Amelia listened patiently, her expression unchanging. She didn't correct him, didn't argue. Her silence was more unnerving than any outburst would have been. "I lost my way," he continued, trying to inject a tremor into his voice. "I got caught up in the pressure, the expectations. I made mistakes. Terrible, unforgivable mistakes. And I am so sorry, Ellie, for what I did to you and to the boys." He paused, waiting for her reaction. A tear, a softening of her eyes. Anything. He got nothing. "Why did you ask me to come here, Justin?" she asked, her tone direct and businesslike. Thrown off by her refusal to engage with his emotional preamble, he stumbled. I need your help. My lawyer says. A letter. A statement to the judge. If you could just tell him that I'm a good father, that I was a good husband who made a mistake under pressure, it could make a difference. For the boys, Ellie. So they don't have to grow up with their father in prison for 20 years. There it was. The transactional heart of his apology. Amelia finally allowed a single, weary emotion to flicker across her face, disappointment. Our sons already have to grow up with a father who is a criminal. Justin, she said, her voice cutting through his pretense. A letter from me won't change the facts of what you did. You didn't make a mistake. A mistake is taking the wrong turn on the highway. You orchestrated a deliberate, years-long campaign of fraud and deceit that hurt hundreds of people, not to mention your own family. Justin's mask of contrition began to crumble. You did this to me, he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You and that old man, you could have come to me, we could have handled it privately. But you had to destroy me. You had to humiliate me in front of everyone. You humiliated yourself. Amelia countered, her voice remaining perfectly level. You built a stage of lies and paraded yourself upon it. All I did was turn on the lights. I came here today to tell you one thing, Justin. The name of my new company is Vance & Co. He stared at her, uncomprehending. What I'm not running from. The name you tarnished, she explained. I'm reclaiming it. I'm building something real, something honest for myself and for our sons. Something they can one day be proud of. That is my statement. My work will be my statement. My life will be my statement. In that moment, Justin finally understood. He had no power here. His charm, his threats, his emotional blackmail. They were all useless against this new version of his wife. She hadn't come here to save him or to gloat. She had come to close the door. Goodbye, Justin, she said, softly. She placed the receiver back on its cradle, the click echoing with finality. She stood up, smoothed her blouse, and walked out of the visitation room without a single backward glance. Justin watched her go, his knuckles white as he gripped the receiver. He was left alone with the humming lights, the grey walls, and the crushing absolute silence of his own empty echo. She had walked out of the grey, sterile room and back into the sunlight, leaving him behind in the void he had created for himself. He was at last, utterly and completely alone. And so the curtains fall on the grand illusion of Justin Vance, a man who built a glittering empire on a foundation of lies, only to watch it get torn down by the quiet, unshakable power of the truth. His story is a chilling reminder that the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows, and true strength isn't found in what you project to the world, but in the integrity you possess when no one is watching. Amelia's journey shows us that even in the face of devastating betrayal, there is an opportunity not for revenge, but for rebirth, for reclaiming your name, your power, and your story. If this story of secrets, lies, and ultimate justice captivated you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who loves a story of epic downfall and powerful redemption. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another tale of drama and intrigue. Thank you for listening.